The early birds, yay!
Hello, everyone.
Here they come.
Hi.
Gluttons for punishment, one and all. Oh, Donna, we've hauled in an extra, boy.
Katie, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Let me.
Okay, just waiting on two more. Kristen and Matt. Don't look so serious, Carter.
I was just looking up something here.
Just looking too relaxed. Oh. Where are our, we'll give it one more minute. We're missing is Kristen and Matt. I guess just give him another minute. Let's see.
Mike Levine is trying to get in.
Oh, uh-oh. Is that in the, let me in. Be careful what you ask for.
Won't let you.
Well, we've got something.
Oh, well, there's Michael.
Katie, we hear you.
Good.
We hear you. Oh, yeah. Wouldn't be a meeting without you.
Thank you.
I don't know why my picture is not showing, but I had trouble getting in. I had to register again. Oh, there we go.
Oh, there you are.
There we go.
There we go.
There you go.
I had to unclick the crossbar on the video.
No.
But I had to register a second time before I could get in tonight.
We just wanted to make sure you knew what you were doing.
You bet I know what I'm doing. I was looking forward to today's meeting so I could thank Susan again for including my request in your additional meeting regulations. Thank you so much. It was very well written.
No problem. What I had sent around to you, I had tried to sort of identify all of the things that we discussed in our last meeting. If anybody has any clarifications on those, as I had put at the top of the page that was supplemental points, what are the other things that we would like to consider that we haven't thought of as yet, at least to get the ideas out there. We can always, hash them out and refine them, but in terms of putting them out there as goals to hit. So,
Susan, I have a point again about voting, because you did talk about calling the question, and you did talk about when we do the voting at the end, the omnibus voting. My question is, when we adopt the agenda and we adopt the minutes, and I think this is for Carter as well as Susan, what Carter normally does is say, is there a motion? Is there a second? Do we need to call for a full vote at that point? I'm not sure what the rule or regulation is. Would it have to be a roll call vote, or is it sufficient to just say, is there a motion? Is there a second? I just put that on the table for further discussion. I'm not sure if that's ever been clarified.
Actually, that's a really good point. It's something that's crossed my mind, since if you ask for a motion in a second, the logical next step would be to vote. I mean, I guess if you simply said, if there's no objection, we assume it's a unanimous vote, but there's no acknowledgement of any kind in the way we've actually been doing it. And so typically, you're right.
I'd follow that. That's what I know. I believe that Terry had done before me, and with the minutes, and then I believe also, I don't know, with David.
I'm sure it is. I assume that you did it because that's the way we've been doing it. But Michael does make a good point that if somebody makes a motion in a second, there's a motion on the floor, and it in some way has to be addressed. So that if you were to simply say, if there's no objection, unless there's someone who's voting against this, I will treat this as a unanimous vote, which gives the, technically it gives the body a chance to someone to say, yes, I do object to this, or it's something within it, because yeah, he's right. Procedurally, we're leaving a motion on the floor unaddressed.
So just for clarification, have we started the committee meeting?
Well, that's a good point. Well, this is not a committee. This is just a working group. We're a relaxed.
So I just texted both Kristen and Matt, and they're both going to be they're going to be joining. Kristen said she'll be about 10 minutes late, and Matt said he's just finishing up another call. So.
Yeah, I mean, we can just we're chatting about actually something that's not actually based on, this is something new and discrete. It
goes back to Michael's point. Oh.
I'm sorry.
I just looked in Robert's Rules of Order. Mm-hmm. It's the 11th edition, which I think is even though I've only had
the 11th edition.
I think, yeah, there's a new one coming out, but it does seem to be the adoption of the minutes probably do need a vote, but a voice vote would be sufficient.
Oh, absolutely. Well, certainly it wouldn't require a roll call. But Mike, what I'm saying is Michael's making a valid point that the way we do it as a matter of practice is you are actually putting a motion on the floor, and then we're sort of abandoning it because you're saying motion, second, and then you're leaving it. So technically, the minutes never get adopted. If you want to be, nitpicky, when nobody ever challenges it, but technically the motion, the minutes are never getting adopted since there's no vote or any acknowledgement of some sort. It's sort of like you open it, you have to close it.
Right. So the other thing is just, it's interesting too, because there are other things that I've watched recently where there are discrepancies in minutes. And so that's the opportunity where somebody has to correct the minutes. And so
that's absolutely right.
Doesn't believe, whatever it may be, about the minutes, you know, or whatever's written, or you know, description of something. And that happens. I just saw that the Loft Board, you know, they went into an extensive discussion about correcting the minutes to match things. So maybe we should put that in the where it lays out the agenda, but where we have it in the bylaws, which, you know, we should probably leave more freedom on that, but that the minutes are voted on. Just put that in there. I'm not, you know, the section I'm talking, I don't know which section it is. I don't have it.
Well, yeah, it's also, you know, this also goes into that concept where I had noted supplemental rules of order, in that whatever we do, we don't have to follow this necessarily the formal procedure of Roberts, if, in the sense that I believe that if we adopted a practice where you said, if there are no objections or changes to the minutes as presented, I will accept this as, or you accept one vote as a unanimous vote.
Well, it's a good opportunity, because that's one of the first things we do that first roll call attendance. So that's, instead of doing it separate, we just do that, and then that accomplishes that. So you've established the attendance for the business session.
Right.
So that precedes that, I believe, right? I don't have.
We do that. Well, yeah, we do that. Actually, we do the adoption before we do the roll call, because the first roll call is in the business session is normally with the first standing committee report.
Right. I'm just looking to see if I have an agenda here.
I mean, this is actually a good point to point out. Whenever you have this, even if you were like saying, well, you know, if there are no objections, a motion to, you know, adjourn the meeting. I mean, somebody, oh, I move second, and nobody votes to adjourn the meeting. If you really want to be technical, our meetings don't end.
So actually, I'm looking at like the agenda here, just for that we use. In the business section, the first item in the business section is the approval of the previous month's minutes. So that actually can be the vote instead of
course it can.
The first item, and you know, that's just.
Oh, of course it can. We can set this up. I mean, something like that roll call. I'm sorry?
It actually makes it easier right now, because instead of just doing a separate attendance, we're actually voting on something. So.
That's right. Absolutely. I mean, remember, the way we're doing a roll call, this is something that we've adopted to ensure attendance.
Yeah, because I think, you know, yeah, no, exactly. I think, but we're pretty much clear on this, right? We should vote on them.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Susan,
so we should vote on the minutes and the agenda.
No, just the minutes. The agenda doesn't need to be
voted on.
It's adopted, right? Do we vote on that? I don't.
No, the agenda is something that you actually set because you're the chair.
Well, it's distributed beforehand, right? And I think that then also in the bylaws. Doesn't it say that it's distributed beforehand, so that is...
But setting the agenda is something that's a prerogative of the chair, to the extent that it doesn't conflict with the sense that the bylaws state that there are certain components that must be present.
Right.
Those kind of things. But in the sense of actually how putting it together, that's a chair's prerogative. But as we've been discussing, the idea of correcting the minutes. Now, it's one thing to say, go back and say, oh, there was a typo. I don't think, but if there's anything of substance, even a change of language, you want to have your minutes officially adopted, because otherwise people go back and technically they would, since they've never been formally adopted, you could argue, well, let's go back and make some changes.
Right. No, I understood. I was just talking about the agenda part, because that was the other.
Right. No.
Okay, Susan. So couldn't you apply that same rule to calling the question? If someone raises their hand and the chair recognizes them and says, I make a motion to end the discussion, someone has to then say, I recognize the motion, someone seconds it, and then there's a vote.
Absolutely. Anytime you've seen someone raise their hand calling the question thinking that they're just simply going to cut off debate, that is flat out wrong. it always requires a vote, and it requires a supermajority. Robert says, I believe, a 2/3, but we can, whatever number we set, it's more than a majority. In fact, that's why one of the points in the supplement that I sent out was the idea that even if someone legitimately calls for it and we get a vote, if people haven't spoken, the chair can say this is a premature motion and reject it.
Right. Okay.
Susan, should the regulations that you've put together and distinguish between the agenda and the minutes, because the agenda is the chairperson's prerogative, and if there are no objections, we follow that. But the minutes, I think you're clearly saying, do need to be adopted by a voice vote. Is it a roll call vote?
It doesn't say adopted. It says approval.
Approved.
And so those are the different. That's what I mean. So, but the vote, Michael, is however people choose to have the vote. Mm-hmm. And the only reason that we've gone to roll calls online is because the way to establish a record is with a voice indication. So there's no way to capture a roll call really online, which is why we haven't. Some other boards' practices have been, everybody says aye, and then you just hear all these ayes, and then, there are any nays, and you don't hear any. And that's not for the purposes of everybody being able to view what's happening. That doesn't allow that to happen. It's assuming, somebody's unmuted, which is why I've tried to do most of these things via roll call. It's like I've heard, if your video is not on some organizations,
you're not there.
Have to establish your presence and attendance by your voice, not just that your name's on the screen. So if somebody can't see you, so I think there's different practices, but I've been trying to do roll calls so that there's a record, that lasts, because we're not all in the room together to see.
So I repeat, Susan, what would you want to memorialize in the supplementary regulations? How would you want to state that so it's clear?
Well, what's in that supplement is not. I don't think it's designed to be a single set of rules by itself. These were points that were all raised at our last meeting, and that I wanted to make sure that I was clear and that on what the group had discussed and what the consensus was, and then to decide how they get inserted in one way or another. So in the sense of, for example, the first one of no commercial promotions, that might be something that goes into our statement of principles because it is a value and a standard. But something like calling the question would go into, if we have, that defined term of rules of order, and that we have a list of rules of order that supplement and amend Roberts, that would go there. I wasn't looking at it as a single contained body so much as these are points and we have to decide where they fit in. You're muted.
You want to start the meeting and just sort of go through the order of how you want to go through things, Susan, because I see Matt's here.
Well, it's about time.
Because there's a couple of things I just wanted to comment on, but instead of having a free-for-all, it might be easier just for you if you want to.
Oh, why not? I mean, I think, we had I think we're in the whole free-for-all mode after last night. I think free-for-all is maybe the new norm. Okay, so let's start with, I had made, is Kristen on yet? Because she had sent something about, she said she made some comments on the statement of core values and principles, but I didn't see it. I didn't note the changes in the attachment that she had. So I don't know if there was anything in there. I don't want to misspeak. I did add a small amount of text to sort of flesh out the idea of what it means to denigrate or disparage somebody, and in our concerns to believe, our standards of respect, and to feel safe, and to feel that we are, a body that doesn't tolerate, any sort of shenanigans. I had added the last sentence was, maybe I'm not sure if it quite belongs there. The idea of prematurely ending debate, in the sense of, again, trying to tie it to the idea of our belief in a full and developed discussion of whatever is before us. I added that sentence there. Maybe it doesn't necessarily belong there. That's something that goes to, a supplemental rule of order, but that's for other people to, weigh in on. As for that list of supplemental points, the numbers 1 through 6 were specifically items raised. There was one more that I had a note to myself, something that was said about amendments, but I didn't have anything other than the word amendments, so I didn't know what to add. If anybody remembers what we were talking about with regard to amendments, that we wanted to make there was something that had to do with a change to the rules, or how we handled amendments that was, in some way, as I recalled, the way we've been handling amendments is we've developed a practice, but it may not be in line with Roberts, which is fine, but we need to then memorialize what we do as a rule, so that we know that we're diverging from Roberts. So if somebody comes to anybody.
Yes, Susan, I'm thinking about it. We did mention it. I don't know that we made a conclusion, or
okay,
or I don't have a note as a conclusion, but you jogged my memory that we did say something about amendments.
Yeah, that's all I had was the word amendments, so I didn't add it, but I'm just putting it out there if anybody else had some thoughts about
Susan,
it.
there was a discussion on whether we wanted, I believe, if memory serves me correctly, a mechanism to have some kind of amendment that didn't require the process that we're going through. I would note that I actually don't think that the process we're doing so much violates Roberts, as it doesn't necessarily conform to the letter of the bylaws itself.
That's the bigger issue.
Yeah. Now, the way that the bylaws itself are written is so conscriptive that, I don't know, not conscriptive, but doesn't allow for a lot of wiggle room.
Yeah, I mean, and which is why, the way it's not there's anything inherently wrong in the way we do things. It's that it A, has to be consistent, and B, has to be acknowledged in some place, so that people don't just say, wait a minute, you're doing it this way, and it's like, that's not, if our standard is Roberts and it veers from Roberts, we have a problem. I
might suggest that amendments might be the next thing we tackle, because just if we tackle amendments, then the following amendments then are more in line with rules than not. It would just be an idea.
Okay, I mean, we can certainly tackle that as a separate topic. The question is that really a bylaws topic, or is that a procedural?
Well, it's in the bylaws. It's in the bylaws.
Okay, I've totally. Okay, so maybe we will deal with amendments specifically as a topic after we get off of where we are, which is our principles, our values, principles statement, and I think it becomes a question of what sort of emanates from that, in the sense of the few points that I had at the top of that page on supplemental points is like, are those other things, whether they're supplemental, for example, do we want to have a freestanding media policy? I mean, we have something in the bylaws talking about how people represent themselves in the press, but do we want to, I mean, other boards have this. We live in an age of social media and multi-platform media that it's not something that goes into the bylaws, but it's something that, you know, there might be people who will, you know, sit down and specifically formulate a media policy. So if we're talking about principles of how we conduct ourselves and how we present ourselves, it's a question that comes up. So Carter, that's something that you have to think about how you want to deal with that.
Well, I think there should be a separate policy. I mean, it just, you know, even if it's 2 sentences or if it's 10 paragraphs, there should be room, because I think just as we go forward, there's, you know, there's constantly new opportunities in different ways to express yourself in different platforms. And I think that it allows the board to quickly develop policies on that and react.
Right.
It's a good idea. I mean, just, you know, even even people have said, well, I don't know if I want to put it on there, but, you know, if I were to start identifying myself as a CB2 board member on Twitter or on Instagram, how does that, you know, is there any other language you might need to put on there if you're, people may not realize that you're not speaking for the board, you may not be authorized to speak for the board, you might be taking a position that's your own, it might be on a matter that hasn't been before the board. So, you know, do we want to have a disclaimer that, you know, whatever that may be?
And it also goes to the idea that since we employ social media, what do we use it for? How do we use it? What do we put on it? You know, that's the flip side of it. Not only our members using, you know, participating in other, you know, originators, but we as having, you know, an identity ourselves on social media.
Yeah, and that's something, you know, we've started to talk about loosely, because, you know, you can't inundate people on our own media channels with things that don't have to do with the board. Or, right. For example, if we have our monthly information coming out, you know, do we want to have a policy? I mean, that you just don't put anything else on there for 24 hours so that that's something that people see. You know, there's all kinds of things. I mean, that's certainly not my forte, but there should be, and I think that there should be room for it to exist. Mm-hmm. Whether it has to exist tomorrow, I think we've been, you know, we've been able to function.
We can survive. We can survive a few more days.
It's something for people to think about, because I know that other boards have struggled with this as they become more active. What's eligible to go on there? So you've got some people saying, I want to put this on there. Some people saying, I don't want to put this on there. And ultimately, you need somebody sort of wearing the hat of being the decider. And I think that other boards have appointed, you know, the chairs appointed somebody to be that. They have
had, you're right. They've had either persons or like a 3-member group that will sort of like filter and make a determination. Is this appropriate for us to post?
Right.
Is this meet our standard of what is a community posting or information or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, and so it's really, you know, it's something that definitely there should be room to develop. And
right.
You know, and I think it should exist outside the bylaws. You know?
Absolutely.
So it can just be changed. I mean, you know, most of this stuff is common sense. And if the board itself changes and wants to be more activist or adopt something that they believe certain, you know, things should be amplified using our media channel, then they should, you know, the board should have the freedom to do that without it being
right. No. Yeah.
But, you know, one of the things in establishing that, though, it may be something that there be consideration of some sort of a supermajority vote on it, because it is the board's communication platform, and, you know, it's different than having 26 board members agree with something. It's something a little different. That policy should have a stronger backing of the board to support it and how it's done, just because it's a long-term.
Okay.
Yeah.
Matt has his hand raised.
But I've never understood the speaking for. I know we've had it. I'm not giving you a hard time. I promise. The speaking for the board thing.
So used to it, Matt. It doesn't matter anymore.
The speaking for the board thing, because I don't know. Either the violation is so flagrant that no reasonable, in my mind, that no reasonable person would be, this is how the board thinks. And it's like, oh, how do you possibly, one, the board is comprised of 50 people, all of whom have individual thoughts. The board only does business through, only does formal business through resolutions. And other than saying, the board believes this, which I always, Congress believes this. Congress doesn't believe any
It's
one
a royal
thing.
we.
Yeah.
Use the old phrase.
I don't know.
Yeah, I can address that. It's basically representing the board in front of legislative bodies or state bodies, which is the issue. So unless that's conferred on you by the chair of the board, that's pretty much one of the main things. And it also with the press, because there's particular elements of how things are articulated or whatever it may be, that's the appropriate body or the person to represent the body. That's the job of that. And that's where social media comes into play and why that needs to be discussed a little bit further.
Well, everybody becomes the press theoretically.
Right, and what could a person who's been designated? I totally understand the testifying in front of a body, but in terms of talking to the press,
I see you guys.
What?
Well, you don't speak on behalf of the board. You may agree with the board's position,
right?
You're not the spokesperson for the board or any other.
Correct. But yeah. No. I don't know. It just feels.
It's more just in real life, in my experiences, it's more what people say when they're taking a minority position than the majority position. And that's happened, in testimony before, where a previous board chair used the position as a previous board chair to speak in support of something that the board was against, but using that previous position as something that they should be afforded weight. So just to give context of where these things play out, and
okay, we got several hands up, so let's go down the list. Patricia.
Were you finished outlining how you were going to approach what you sent us in email, or do we just?
No, not at all. This is sort of like, our conversations I've known have a fluidity to them. I do not attempt.
Oh, okay. All right. So two things I want to, I want to go back to number 3. First of all, I want to say everything you laid out, you captured, and I agree with. The only thing I'm having an issue with is calling the question, where it says, members who wish to speak on a given matter have been recognized by the chair of the meeting and given an opportunity to speak at least once. We have some kind of, verbiage that says who hasn't spoken, who hasn't been recognized by the chair, because there's sometimes these conversations over an issue are always between a few board members, and it goes back and forth, and then someone raises their hand, and then someone calls the question. And then it's been an hour already that we've been discussing this topic. Should we have some kind of like a time limit when we're talking about issues, so that these meetings don't go on, and that the chair says, I'm only going to call on people who haven't spoken on this issue or who have something new to add that we've heard that we haven't heard?
Well, I think certainly the language can be modified to make it clear that during a discussion, if a member who has not previously spoken, once a member who has not yet spoken on the subject wishes to be recognized, that the chair has an obligation to recognize that person. But once, at least one, if your person's been recognized once, then they don't automatically have the right to sort of put off calling the question. A person who has not spoken, if someone calls the question and then someone says, I raised my hand, I have not spoken yet and I want to speak, then the chair would have an obligation to say, okay, calling the question at this point is premature. But if there's nobody left who wishes to be recognized, and then someone calls the question, well, that's it. I mean, yes, we don't want to have people just going back and forth. That's the whole point of calling the question, but that trying to balance it in some way.
But, all right, okay, I hear what you're saying, but if someone calls the question and the other person hasn't been recognized, and that person who called the question says, I move to end the discussion, and then the chair has to then say, I recognize that you've put a motion on the floor. Does anyone second it? Then you have to go to a vote. You still can't go and address the next person if you've got the 2/3 vote.
Well, before accepting the motion, that the chair would then have to be, we can set the rules so that if someone makes the motion, the chair first has to, or saying the motion is made and the motion is seconded, that before you can vote on it, the chair would have an obligation to then ask the members, is there anyone yet? Otherwise we will vote. If not, then I will declare the motion premature.
Okay.
You could ask if there's any opposition to voting, yeah.
Well, it's not just opposition to voting.
I'm there.
If there is a member who has not spoken yet and wishes to be acknowledged to speak, then the chair would have the obligation to say, even though seconded, this motion is still premature. We can have that as a rule.
The view from the chair's position, is that usually there are already hands up either in Zoom or in person. So when we're meeting in person, it's obvious.
Right.
Zoom, it's obvious because there's a hand up already. So I think that the marker of time is when that person calls to question, it's whoever's hands are up. Or
that's true. And that can
I don't think this is a complicated issue. Just to Patricia's point,
Carter,
you don't want to further the conversation by asking, everybody if they want to throw in more stuff, right? You just want to say, hey, are there any hands up that haven't spoken or not? I mean, that's.
Could we phrase it that that calling the question is out of order if a member who hasn't spoken would like to speak, at which point, Patricia, you could then raise a point of order if you wanted to.
Yes, I like that.
That would do it. That's fine.
And it's best to really lay it out very clearly.
Exactly, yeah.
Just because this is something that is very important, because when it does come up, it's something that on an impassioned topic or a topic that somebody's very impassioned about, you don't want to leave ambiguity that somebody feels that they were wronged by shutting down their voice. And so,
absolutely. It doesn't happen. It happens from time to time, but when it happens, it matters. And therefore, you're absolutely right. This should be clear. And I will work the language and circulate it so that, if is to make sure that everyone's comfortable with what we've got. And this is a perfect example of having our supplemental rules of order, and that these supersede anything in Roberts. So when we have in our statement of core principles, we refer to rules of order, it's Roberts as supplemented or amended by this particular list of which this item is a part.
Okay. I have one more thing.
Mm-hmm.
On your list, I just want to illustrate, I don't know if everyone watched the debates last night, but the vice president and the president were cutting each other off, and you could not hear someone's complete thought because they kept interrupting each other. I've seen that in our board meetings, and I don't want that to continue. Is there a way that we can craft language to illustrate that and run our meetings in a civil way? I mean, so we're not like speaking over one another, like what we saw in the debates last night?
Well, you know, aside from sort of the principles that we set in terms of general courtesy, actually that is something that whoever is chairing it, you know, who is chairing a particular committee or the board at a time is supposed, I mean, that's got to do with order. I mean, a person can be called, it's I don't know if there's a specific rule of order in the sense of you can call somebody out of order for cutting off another person. Okay. Usually, I think up to this point, if we find that's happening, the chair simply says, you know, to whoever cuts in, you need to wait. I can certainly see what Robert has to say about that, if anything, and try to put something into words.
Only one person.
I'm sorry. What I was going to say is that in the event, why you might want language, that in the event that, say, you have a chair who sort of encourages a more loose sort of discussion, that a member could raise their hand and say, point of order, we are not, you know, people are not finishing their statements to some extent like that.
Okay, thank you.
There's also an aspect of in there too of, you know, for example, non-executive committee members are not permitted to speak. And as chair, I've been allowing non-members to speak at our executive committee. And what's happened is that you have a much rounder discussion with more people than what's actually a committee meeting. And so by formalizing a process, you actually take away those people's opportunity to speak during what I've been allowing is more free-ranging discussion in the executive committee meetings. And that's one of the things that I had pointed out before. In formalizing that process, you actually take away the opportunity of who can speak. And that's something that the more strict you become, you actually take away sometimes the whatever is in, you know, however the spirit of that moment may be. And that's something to consider as well. And it's something that people forget. And it goes to Michael's point as well that he had raised before about non-committee members speaking during the business session. So yeah. there's a complication in there when you, by adding more structure, you can actually take away opportunities that are you know, allowed. I'm very permissive in who speaks, and so I recognize that a lot. So I don't
think we're talking about, though, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I don't think we're talking about who's speaking, but the fact that you can't understand what somebody's saying because they've been cut off, in the sense that if someone speaks, they should have the ability to finish their statement before the next person speaks, because otherwise you end up with a jumble, and that's how you get misunderstanding. So I think it's simply a question of saying, if someone has been cut off, to say, no, you have to wait until the other person finishes, then you get recognized, and then you speak. So we're not saying about who can and who cannot speak. I think this is about an assumption that everyone involved in this discussion is eligible to speak. Yes. It's got to simply do with, you know, the structuring of it so that there's nothing lost. Okay, and let's go next. Okay, Katie, we need your wisdom. Talk to us.
I think we've gone down another rabbit hole. I'll have to write down what I want to say, because we went in a different topic, and I was actually back on something.
Okay, else. So then I'll go to Michael, and I'll come back to you. But
I'll let you know when I can.
I'm too comfortable with rabbit holes. That's my problem. Yeah. Go ahead, Michael.
Okay, I would like to pick up again, because the subject did change, and that relates to media policy. When I worked for Community Board 1, we had a very good rule which was never memorialized, but was always practiced by the chairperson of the executive committee, and the members of the community board were very respectful of it. This again was 3 years ago. Times may have changed, but we separated out media policy into two different buckets. One was social media, and the second was the press. The rule for social media was that no one may post anything regarding Community Board 1 without the express approval of the Community Board chairperson. And at that point, it was the district manager who was the only one allowed to speak for Community Board 1 in social media. And that would be mostly reporting on resolutions adopted as CB1 policy. And the most important thing we used it for was to publicize public meetings at which issues would be discussed. So that was the first bucket, social media. We were very careful to indicate who had the ability to post anything regarding CB1, and it worked at that time. Social media is changing. I don't know if we can control it that well. The second area was media, and that was a lot easier to control because a lot of members, believe it or not, are afraid to talk to the press. And the rule we had there is no one is allowed to speak to the press about any community board matters or issues or resolutions unless it's the chairperson or unless the chairperson authorizes them to speak that way. So when we do talk about media, and I'm not sure if that's on today's agenda or a future agenda, I would recommend Susan and Carter that we keep in those two buckets. Social media is different from the press, and they would need slightly different regulations and slightly different ways to follow up on who does what. It worked very well when I was a staff member at CB1 for 10 years, and I think we could also make that work for CB2.
Okay. I think I think I'm getting the sense that a formal freestanding social media policy, press/media policy, is warranted. And though it may be incorporated by reference in the bylaws, it's not going to be an element of the bylaws. In the sense of, in the detailed sense, it will have, in the sense of it's acknowledged and that there's a media policy that our members are expected to adhere to. But in order to best capture the reality of what it's like to have a contemporary media and press, that it needs to be, an auxiliary document.
Agreed.
I think it should keep that one phrasing that's already in there, and then go for further details.
Yeah, that's a good jumping off point. Absolutely, there is a statement about that if you're not authorized to speak, and that you also about representing yourself. If you speak on a matter, if you're quoted, it's like the idea that your response, you must make it clear you speak for yourself as an individual. You do not represent the board in any capacity. That should remain, but we will have, that's, the more robust and detailed social media policy is something for its own day. So, Katie, did you think about that? Did something come to you?
I wrote down the two things that that had come to mind, and one of them was about the media policy, and been a couple mentions of the fact that other community boards have media policies, and maybe we should just collect them. Not, no more reinventing the wheel, and take a look and
Absolutely.
right. I'm sorry I even said it because I know Susan's thinking it, but always good to articulate. But I wanted to go back, Matthew, to what you were saying about speaking for the board, and I emphasize what Carter pointed out. It has not been so much of an issue lately, but in past years, before I was on the board, there were times when we had very fraught issues before the Board of Standards and Appeals, which is a very serious place, and, as Carter said, a minority issue. Someone who had voted no on a resolution that the community board passed, and the community board was representing to the Board of Standards and Appeals their opinion, then another community board member comes along and is a little loosey-goosey about their relationship. They say, oh, I don't like this, but they weren't very clear that it was a personal opinion, not a board opinion, and that's why we do have to, keep those two lanes separate, and we have to remind people that they cannot speak for the board unless they've been authorized. And
Okay.
there have been some sticky wickets, Matthew. There have been some sticky wicket moments about this, and we haven't seen it lately, but it's something it's something that I totally approve of being clear about.
Yeah.
Because I can imagine it might happen again.
I mean, that's something that, while it exists in the bylaws, can be clarified in the bylaws, it is also something that would go into a media policy because it belongs in both places.
Good.
And just to Katie's point, the other issue, and in the example that I used, is by using your position on the board, by even simply stating that you're a board member, is drawing weight to your minority opinion, even though it is not the opinion of the board. And that is where when you say you invoke your membership in a body to say anything, you're trying to give yourself a higher position when you're speaking as an individual over any other individual of the public. And so that's problematic when you use that to give yourself some sort of authority when it has not been conveyed on you to do that, or conveyed to you.
So it's, sorry.
Go ahead, Matt.
No, it's funny because my issue is actually not that, it's the reverse. I get uncomfortable with people speaking for the board. So not in front, well, a little bit in front of, it's very hard to speak for a board beyond a resolution.
That's not true at all. And that's not true at all, because in the real life, when you go before a body and they start asking questions, that is where that's where that comes into play, of why it's important for who has been conveyed the authority to represent the board. So for example, if you're in front of LPC commissioners, the commissioners start asking questions about aspects, or in front of the liquor authority or in front of BSA, and you start getting questions, that's where that actually comes into play, and why somebody in a position of authority who's been conferred that right is important to have that person as the designated person to do that. That's where that comes into play.
And I'm not fighting you on this. Give me an example of something where a person would have to speak for the board beyond what would be in a resolution. I'm just for my own.
If you're in front of LPC and we did a short sentence that we don't like the way a roof line is finished, and we say we don't like this, and then the commissioners say, well, would you like this or would you like that? You can bring back the conversation that occurred at the committee level of what that discussion was, to give them an idea of what that discussion was. And that's not necessarily reflected in a resolution.
That makes sense.
Like the origin of a particular statement. And that happens quite frequently when, it happens quite frequently. I'll just that.
Let me back up what Carter is saying. I had the experience of testifying before the City Planning Commission on many land use issues for Community Board 1, and we're only given 2 minutes to speak, and sometimes that 2 minutes is simply not enough to explain all of the issues. And when the 2 minutes are over, of course, a bell it rings, just like we have for our Community Board meetings, and then frequently the commissioners will go around the table and ask questions of the person speaking for the Community Board that are relevant to the issue, that have been discussed in committee, but there was not time to include that in the statement nor in the resolution. And at that point, we always know as staff members, we had the authority to speak on behalf of the committee, so long as it was not an item that no one had ever discussed.
Michael, we have a bell that rings.
Oh, we do, just no.
Wait, my husband is making coffee. That's a little bit of a noise. I'm sorry. So we were always given the opportunity to speak and to answer questions from commissioners, provided that the committee had in fact discussed it at some point. So Matt, it is a very important tool to be able to speak on behalf of the board, even though not everything is reflected in the resolution. You can't just stand there before LPC or CPC and say, gee, I don't know, I can't say anything. It's worse for the issue you are discussing than if you try to answer the question fairly, honestly, and impartially.
Is he making enough for everyone?
Yeah, Michael, how is this getting delivered to us?
Really? Well, you know the old rule, if you eat in class, you better have enough for everyone.
So here's another question, which is that I don't have really an opinion on this. So, you know, there are two, I think, strategies. You can either say you shouldn't reference your community board participation, or you have to disclaim that you don't speak for the board. And I have always found those disclaimers to be a backdoor
thing. When someone, go ahead, finish, please.
No, I'm sorry, Susan.
Oh, I was going to say, I think it's important to distinguish between someone who independently, they happen to be a member of the board and they are choosing to speak, or they're being interviewed and then they're speaking, versus someone who has been designated already to speak, and then in a manner consistent with that authority granted to them, that they, you know, elaborate as before some sort of a commission or a body, and they already have the right to, but in order to be an effective advocate for the board, that they, you know, supplement what was actually in a resolution or say a formal letter. Because what I think Carter and Michael were talking about is that someone has the authority, has been vested with the authority to appear before a body, and then in order to be an effective advocate to, you know, support the resolution that they're there to support, provide supplemental information, which is different from someone who is purely an a private citizen, just happens to be a board member, but then chooses to opine or is in some point interviewed by a member of the press.
Correct. And I'm only, in this scenario, I'm only speaking to the former.
Right.
So in the scenario, you know, you have two strategies. You can either say you can't, you know, don't reference your community board membership, or disclaim that you don't speak for the board. You know, in the former, I get a little nervous about, you know, telling people what's that?
You should actually, in a sense that if you don't make a disclaimer, if it's well known, I mean, if Carter goes out and in our community, people know he's chair of CB2, if he doesn't bother to say, I'm just speaking for myself, there's a reasonable inference. People could reasonably
absolutely
for the board. He has an affirmative obligation to make a disclaimer.
Absolutely. My only concern is that because I was writing it out for something else, and it felt like I was just trying to mention the fact that I was a member. It didn't flow in the letter. You know what I mean? Like, it just was like, and by the way, I don't, it just felt like a PBA card as you get pulled over kind of thing.
Yeah, it's tough to know.
Just food for thought. I'm not saying don't use a disclaimer. I'm not, I had that thought I wanted to share.
Yeah, no, I think ultimately it's, you're hoping that whoever this individual is, that they use their judgment to make it clear in the situation, however is best appropriate, that that in no way do they speak for the board or do they carry any authority to speak. How that may be formulated may, vary to the specifics of the situation, but it's incumbent on the board member to make sure that there is no confusion as to the weight that their statements carry. So, Don, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, it happens all the time with any of us who are involved in community things, right? So if you go to a different group and they say, "Oh yeah, you're the person from CB2," and you know the inference is that you speak for the board, and that's the distinction. You know that, you know, I always say, "Well, I'm not speaking for the board." I constantly say that, and you know, and just if that matter comes before us, is that, you know, everything always caveated. But people think that it's very easy for people to think that whatever you're conveying is a board policy, and right. So that's a distinction that is. You
can only do so much, you know, if you can't force people to think a certain way. The important point is that a board member makes best efforts, and if something does appear in print, that it's like, you know, if you make this disclaimer and the reporter doesn't include that, then, you know, you have to follow up and say, you know, something you didn't mention, that I was speaking in my personal capacity, because you don't want that kind of confusion. But, you know, it's in the real world, you can only, you know, set a standard. Donna, we haven't heard from you. Come speak to us.
I was just going to say, you know, if you're just talking about the press, I think you do have to say that you're not speaking on behalf of the board, because the press, you never know how that's going to go. But it's a little subjective. I meet as a community member, as somebody who lives in this area, often before people come to CB2 for a liquor license, as somebody who lives here and the impact that would be. Since I've joined the community board, I always make a point of saying that anything I'm saying at that meeting has nothing to do with the community board. I'm here strictly as a resident, and that's that. And for some other things that will never come before the community board, have no association with New York City politics or anything like that, I wouldn't even think to mention that I was on the community board one way or the other, because it doesn't overlap at all.
Right. Well, you know, the tough thing is that, you know, for many of us, the same sort of interests that get us involved in the community board tend to make us involved in other community type things. So, exactly. You know, your reputation precedes you, and there are assumptions that flow from that. So it's just a question of being sensitive to that.
Great.
Yes, Patricia.
Yes. I just need clarification from Carter, because Carter said that you shouldn't really mention that you're a community board 2 member and then say you were speaking, my opinions are my own. I've been doing that since I've been on the community board. When I go to CEC meetings, I say I'm a D2 parent, I'm a community board 2 member, but my opinions and thoughts are my own. That's how I always do it, even before city council, when I have 2 minutes to speak or a minute to speak. The only time where I don't say that my opinions are my own is when I've been asked to be on a task force, because I was chosen to be on that task force because of my affiliation with the community board.
Right, right.
And that's what's outlined in the bylaws right now, I believe. And the point I was bringing up is that there's room for discussion on that and how people want to see it going forward. Because if you're speaking on your own, it's the question of whatever you're speaking to. If you're speaking before a body in a minority position against the community board's position, and you were on the body that deliberated it, and that's different than I think what you're describing, which is, you know, I'm not sure how to articulate that, you know, because
Patricia actually raises a very interesting situation, which is you were asked to be on a task force, but because you're a member of CB2. But did that request come through the board, and therefore you were selected, which means you are a representative because it was a request that came to the board for a member to join? Or were you simply asked directly because people know of your membership? No, you're not in the same seat. You're not in the same position in those 2 different situations.
being on the task force, it was through an elected official. They were sitting on the same task force, and because of my work with certain schools, or because of being on the schools and ed committee, they wanted my opinion, and that's how I came to be asked to be a part of that.
Yeah, but still, that wasn't a request put to the board. And they like, if the elected had asked for you, had asked the board, oh, please have her join. The fact that it came to you without going through the board is a distinction.
Oh.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah, so for example, the appointed, you know, we don't have too many appointments like you're describing that come through the board, but you're also appointed not just because you're a board member, because you have a broader interest in that subject matter. That may be part of that decision making, but you know, if an elected official, you're involved in a lot of education issues, not just, you know, CB2. And so that's what, you know, that's why they're coming to ask you, you know,
yeah, it's not a question of, there's nothing wrong with you doing it. It's just that when you give your opinion, it's like in those moments where it's like you may think people are relying on your knowledge based on CB2. It's like, I do not speak for CB2. I'm sharing with you the knowledge I have acquired through various activities, including being, but it's not, I'm not the voice of CB2 while on this committee. That's all.
And Patricia, you're right. There's no definitive fine line, you know, that you could lay this all out. But the issue is speaking in front of other deliberative bodies that are making another decision that we generally provide our recommendations to. That's where this really comes up. Or in the matter of the press, you know, if you start asking questions, that's where you know, you really need somebody who's specifically, you know, designated to answer those questions. The same way as in front of a body, you know, it's, you know, if somebody says, hey, do you support the resolution? You say, yes, that's one thing. If you get asked a detailed question about something that's a nuanced aspect of it, with some other things, it falls into a different, you know, category. But it's not an issue so much now, but it has been. And you know, it has been, while I've been chair, there have been a few instances, you know, where there are some scenarios, and it's better just to be clear about it so nobody feels, you know, that they're in the wrong position. You know, most of our board members want to follow the rules. They just, if it's not clear, you don't know how to. And, you know, I give that benefit to every board member, and I'm pretty sure that that's, you know, the case.
Katie, your hand is up, Katie.
Oh, that was from before.
Oh, okay. You know,
I had another thing too, Susan, whenever you're ready.
I just was saying that, you know, I realized we sort of veered off into a whole media policy discussion here, and that's just great. But I wanted to, because we've already passed the hour mark, that I wanted to get back to our statement of principles. I specifically, now, Kristen, I wanted to ask you, you said you had made some minor edits, but I didn't see them on what was attached to your email. I couldn't detect them.
I got you. Yeah, I actually made comments rather than actual
Oh, they
edits.
were comments.
Yeah, so sometimes they don't quite show up as much, but I just commented about 3 points of language, just being very specific as you would.
Okay, I guess it just didn't show, when I downloaded it, it didn't show up. So I will, you know, something I will get that from you offline so that I have a, you know, because when I just downloaded it, for some reason it says it's not supporting all the features. So maybe I'm just not seeing your comments, and that's why.
Okay. Yeah.
So I guess, you know, if we want to then say keep moving, or just discussing this whole media thing, is there anything in that original statement of values and principles that we would like to address further. What's, you know, as I said, I asked the question, what's missing? What needs to be addressed? What is, you know, how does it fall short? Unless it may be something that we're really comfortable with right now, and it will only come back to as we look at other things and then something pops up. I just like, if this is working for people, then let's say, okay, and we'll move on to something else. I just don't want to have too many things, you know, sort of like floating at the same time.
I think back to Michael's suggestion, I think that should say use of media and then just say, you know,
I will
press policy and social media. The other thing I wanted to say, I think that number one is too restrictive about commercial promotions.
Okay, that's not, just to stop you, that is not part of the principle, the course, that statement. These are other items that we raised that we have to determine where they go.
Got it.
Whether or not that's got to do with, you know, to a certain extent, that can be mentioned in the bylaws. That may be something, another, you know, I don't know what else, but the numbered items were simply things that were brought up at the last meeting that I wanted to make sure that that I got correct.
The supplemental rules of order that you have in here, do the supplemental rules of order need to reside in the bylaws?
They can't. Sorry.
They can't.
It can, but if you look at the actual, if you look at the original, the statement of principles, and as the second to last sentence where it says, as provided in the rules of order, which is a capitalized, therefore it's going to be a defined term. Those supplemental rules will be incorporated into the definition of rules of order, will include Roberts as supplemented and or amended by the supplemental rules passed by the board.
So those exist as a separate document?
That would be, and as I said earlier, one of the items that would be a supplemental rule would be the idea of calling the question, that we have our own variation on the rule calling the question.
I understand that, but is that defined in the bylaws, or is
it can't reside in the bylaws? Otherwise, they would be they cannot. So because then they would be bylaws. It has to be like an appendix, effectively. But it's basically a totally separate from a. I don't want to say from a legal standpoint, but from like a technical standpoint, it's a totally separate document.
It's a structural set.
The reason that I just bring it up is that, do the rules of order need to be amended as if they were bylaws, or is this something that is amended as time goes forward?
That's why they can't be in the bylaws.
Okay.
Is because so that well, unless you want them to be in the bylaws as bylaws, but you know the other things could be, you know, suspended, as the rule could be suspended, you know, I think it's a 2/3 vote, you know, and that's the beauty of it.
Right. So was trying to think of all the things that we're creating that are outside of the bylaws, but that are affiliated with the bylaws. So you have the rules of order, you would have the media policies.
Right, that's those first things that's what I'm saying, that the items that I just had up there is, you know, not the numbered, but supplemental rules of order, a policy about acting in self-interest, media, those I was envisioning them as each independent documents that
Understood. I was just trying to, are there any others? Like what, I'm just trying to.
That's what I'd like you guys to tell me. I was like, you know, I mean, when I'm, you know, you think about this, but after a while your brain freezes. So it's a question of, and I'm not saying you have to come up with it right now, but as we come up with these, as we think about it and sort of digest all of this, someone may come up with another type of, you know, a supplement that enhances, you know, our functioning.
Yeah, no, I was just just wanted to make sure that I couldn't think of anything else that we currently have or something that would, but it's even if it's smaller policies that we want to have something, it's just good to
Right.
have them.
Susan, I have a silly question to ask now at this point. Do the bylaws need a supermajority to be amended, or is it a plain majority? And would the rules of order need to be adopted by majority? How would that work?
Well, the point of the rules of rules of order is that it's a majority vote. It's a standard. That's why it's not. To the extent that the specifics within the document. But if you're talking about a change to the bylaws and that part of, for example, adding a defined term of rules of order as bylaws, then it has to follow whatever the standard is for changing the bylaws.
Bylaws generally requires advance notice, where a rules change does not.
That's another thing, right?
But does it need a supermajority, or is it a plain majority?
I think it's a plain majority.
Somebody tell some jokes while I'm looking this up.
Yeah, I something, and it could be I somehow I don't remember it being a super majority, but again, that could be something that you can establish something that's but as we
the other thing I was going to throw out there, and this is specific to COVID, but we may have discretion at some point in how we meet. And I don't know if we want to have a standing policy on, or create an opportunity for there to be some sort of protocols that we have that are agreed on by the board.
You're a little vague.
Meaning that there may be an opportunity where the board can meet in various ways, that the governor may extend. And so, for example, we allow the public to participate in our meetings, but we are not required to. And we allow public testimony, but we are not required to. And that is because the spirit of our board is, of course, we would not exclude them. But there are other government entities that specifically exclude live testimony. And, do we want to create an opportunity for that to exist should in the future there be further changes to any of the emergency powers that the governor has, so that, for example, if we are given the opportunity that we could have 50% of people meeting in person or more, but people could participate remotely, do we want to take on our own rules and adopt our own rules with respect to that? Or do we want to just, essentially that becomes at the discretion of the chair. So I just want to leave room for that to be.
There's always room for it. Something is saying to me that's a little premature. We've got enough to work on, and it's like, I think as we go through the things that we've already identified, we can always circle back if that seems to be something that's actually going to happen.
We don't have anything right now that says that we have to allow members of the public to testify.
That's right.
Nothing, in person, there's nothing that requires us to, we just have done it. So if somebody chose not to, they would not be out of order, is what I'm saying. And so,
you're saying like a committee chair said we're not going to have public testimony
right.
at a committee.
And there's nothing that's written anywhere that could stop that. And it is not a requirement in the governor's executive order. And so I anticipate going forward that it's not going to be a switch that goes back to normal. And so we may want to leave, or even here say that, we affirm that we will always have an opportunity for the public to testify at our meeting. So it may be that we may be able to meet in person, but we opt to allow that testimony virtually for the public, for example. There's all little variations. I just throw that out because it's something as we go forward that we might want to just loosely collect or create that structure now.
Susan, we might want to call that not just COVID related. Carter's making a very good point, but emergency situations may require different practices, and add that to the list of things to consider, because it's not just COVID. There could be other issues in the future that force us back into this kind of semi-remote, combined whatever. And I think the broader subject should be procedures for emergency situations. It might work better that way, and I think we can add that to our list.
Okay, look, that's a good idea for a placeholder, and that we then have to think about what do we put, if that's a heading, what are the specifics? But yeah.
Can I throw in just that? So to to adopt a standing rule with advance notice requires only a simple majority. Without advance notice, it requires a supermajority, a 2/3 majority, or a majority of the entire membership of the voting body. So if you get 26 people to vote yay on a standing rule, irrespective of what the quorum is and irrespective of advance notice, you can pass the rule. The beauty of standing rules, in my mind, is that they are specifically there for emergencies. You don't even have to put them in. That when the emergency arises, you pass as long as it's not violating the bylaws, you take anything like that out of the bylaws and into the standing rules. And when the thing occurs, you can pass the rule. Now, I think Carter brings up a really good point about, thinking about all of it, but it being outside the bylaws gives us significant flexibility.
Right. And to amend the bylaws, what's the standard? Just to confirm?
To amend the bylaws, hang on. I believe with advance notice, it's still 2/3, but I'm not sure. Hang on. I'm not going to make this up. I'll get back. I'll tell you in 2 seconds.
Okay. But what I'm saying is that it's a higher standard.
And just
yes,
we may just want to lay that out somewhere, that the standards for all committee meetings where we're doing anything is that we have an opportunity for the public to speak, so that maybe we just have that, if we're considering any motion
that's a good supplemental rule of order, in the sense that it's not.
I'm just saying it's a good just to codify, because this expresses the sentiments of how we want to govern, and I think it's important to express that, because it's one of the things that I've had this discussion with people at the Liquor Authority. I'm like, guys, you're operating under the same rules that we are. We bend over backwards to have the public testify in matters before you. And you guys require all these written submissions in advance. Every single community board in Manhattan has the public testifying, and you guys can't even figure it out, or choosing not to do it. That doesn't seem particularly fair. And I hear that from so many of the restaurant owners who want to be able to testify in these disciplinary hearings. Nobody's able to speak in a fashion that they can address things in the moment. So I just don't think we should ever have that ability.
It's an excellent addition to our rules of order. Yeah. And it comports with our principles, but in the sense of where our principles are a general aspirational statement, this is something specific, so that if someone comes to a meeting and says, and a chair decides, I'm not taking any public testimony, you can turn to it and go, I'm sorry, but you can't violate your own rules.
The public member technically can't, but another member could. The public person couldn't, but a member of the board could.
That's a good question. It's a question of, who do we want to extend this to?
Right.
I just want
okay, Kate, let's say from Katie, because her hand is up.
And I have a meeting at 6:30. I have to get off this call.
Oh.
But I looked at our bylaws, and Matt may agree with me to adopt an amendment is a simple majority, according to what I read, and I hope Matt agrees with me. Always two eyes better than one. But I really agree with Carter about thinking about the procedures for emergency situations, not just for the benefit of the public, but so many of our community board members may not be able to come back in person for a long time, until the vaccine takes effect.
You may have hybrids. Yeah.
Well,
so I agree, Carter. It'd be better to have some sort of a guideline. Maybe it's not in the bylaws, but some sort of a guideline.
I mean, if we have to meet 50%, who gets to decide who gets to come? We need to. There has to be room for that.
That's a really good point. If we have to socially distance who shows up in person, yeah.
Right. And I mean, these are all just things we should leave a provision for something that we can just fit that right in. And, because look, this stuff happens like, boom, here's what you got to decide. The governor does not wait, to listen, hear our input. They make decisions. And so the faster we can shift gears, the better.
Yeah.
And we should codify the lessons that we've learned from this. We've learned a lot in this period of time, and it'd be good to just, write it down, have it as a beginning point and outline, and not lose the special knowledge that the experience has that we've gained from the experience.
Right.
And okay, so are you going to set the next meeting, Susan? Or we are on the 19th, right? We have a meeting.
We currently have the 19th booked. The schedule is really pretty solid between now and then. So I don't know that there's an opportunity to meet between now and then. I'm sorry, Patricia, you did have your hand up. I don't want to overlook you.
Okay, well, I have to say good night then.
Okay, and, I will let you know, but the 19th, yes, you're looking at the 19th.
Yeah, okay, super. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
I have to say good night too, because I have a meeting at 6:30 also. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Okay. Patricia, you're muted.
Sorry, yeah. I'm not sure where this statement I'm gonna make is. What about our hearing impaired members of the board or of the community? Is there a way to is there something we could do because of the COVID situation is there an accessibility feature in Zoom, Carter, to?
There may be. I mean, I think, there might be. I know that from looking at the transcripts, they're not always that great. But I'm sure we can look into that.
It's interesting because we have an obligation to hold our meetings in ADA compliant spaces, but no, I don't know if anybody's addressed the fact that are we using technology that is also compliant?
So there is I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the things that's why we started for like the SLA meetings, we always use a microphone with the speaker so that everybody can hear, even when the group is very small. It's something that Bob's been really good about doing so that people can hear. I just looked here, there's an opportunity if somebody wants to type for the closed captioning, they could type if we wanted to assign somebody. I don't know if, if getting somebody from ASL, for sign language, if we want somebody signing, but, generally those are services that are requested and nobody's ever requested that I'm aware of or requested those services. And I think that generally that's something then when it's for the sign language, when it's requested, I think that is something that the city does, that they do provide.
They should have an obligation to provide it to us. If we say we need it, then yes, as a government entity, we should have that right to request it. I'm sorry, Matt, what did you want to say?
Oh, I was just gonna. Carter stole my thunder. No, I was gonna say that there's a scrolling. Feed that you can turn on, but it's not very good. But it's better than nothing. But I also forgot to say that I felt like Carter was speaking to my soul when he was saying making sure that everybody gets a chance, that the public gets a chance to speak, and I didn't say that, so I really support that. So.
Okay. Well, we've got plenty. I
wanted to touch on the one thing you listed here, which is on the commercial promotions.
Yeah.
And the way this is written, it's a little too restrictive. So for example, let's say a new business opened that people are excited about, that's something that's being discussed, you know, or, you know, it prohibits that. So it's a fine line. And I think that this is a little too restrictive in talking about, you know, what becomes a commercial promotion. So,
well, we're not talking about members of the public coming and saying, oh, I'm opening a new business in the community and I want people to be aware. This is really has to do more with a board member trading on their status as a board member.
Oh, I understand. I'm just saying that the way that this is written is, let's say, you know, you had something that opened that had been subject, that had come before us for whatever permit. And then somebody announced, oh, and by the way, that really interesting spot that had this, that, or the other is open now. That the way that this is read, you wouldn't, you know, so that's not a commercial promotion, that's an interest, but somebody could say that, and in reading this,
well,
I'm not sure they would be wrong.
I think what I guess I need to distinguish is the idea of a promotion for self-interest versus promoting something that is existing, you know, for general interest.
You're right. I'm just saying that, but the split, the other side of that though is you could say, oh yeah, I really love this place and I mention it every time I speak. So that's not what we want, but there's. Right,
but a person doesn't stand to gain financially. If you had an ownership interest in the business.
Oh, I understand. I was gonna say, maybe we want to say, unless it's of general interest to the board. There's just something, I don't know, there's something in there that just seems very, the active and passive forms of promotion.
I mean, okay, the, you know, something I got to think about the language. And I understand what you're saying, and I know you want to strike a right balance. It's not wrong to let people to promote things just because they are business entities. It's a question of trading on your status, you know, in the sense of it's got, okay.
I'll give you an example. Prior to the pandemic, you know, they did dinner on 8th, right? And if I were to mention in a chair's report, oh, and everybody should go and check out dinner on 8th next week, you know, it's a great event. That, you know, that in reading
that's not the intention of this, and if you feel that is, then the language does need to be clarified. The point is that if you were making money off an event and you said, oh, you should come, and it's like, you know.
Oh no, I'm just saying it's not also, it's just not you're making money or not off the event. I don't disagree with the sentiment of this. I'm just saying that in the interest of the community, as community board members, we also are informing people about something that's unique or interesting. So that's all I'm saying. But this would prohibit somebody in my reading from putting something up in their background as their Zoom background. You know, you don't put in there like, I love Ben and Jerry's, you know, like as your Zoom background.
I know, I agree with you. I understand what you're saying is that I need to draw a distinction between you're promoting, you're advocating for something that has a commercial nature versus something, it's like, you know, now that I own an interest in, well, Ben and Jerry's was sold to, I forget which conglomerate, but in the sense of my company that, you know, I make profit off of, and that you're promoting it, you know, it's like, you know, it's good because I'm a CB2 member and I wouldn't, you know, lie about it. That's what we're talking about.
You know what, I guess I'm looking at this again, you know what it comes down to, it's the reason it's jumped out is when this prohibition shall cover both active and passive forms of promotion. The passive was what started to make me think about it, but I'm recognizing that the passive is, I think when you wrote it, passive is different than what I'm thinking of as just informational. Maybe
Zoom backgrounds.
Right. Okay. Let me take this into account. Let me think about it, and when I circulate some revised language, and then you'll tell me if I'm on the mark or not.
Susan, I have a sensitive question regarding this. What if a board member in public session rises to promote a book that they have written. Is that prohibited by the statement that you've written here?
It's funny. Technically, that's a good question, because if they're speaking in public session and they're speaking as simply a member of the public, I don't know where we quite stand on that. It's certainly, it could be problematic. And frankly, I do recall somebody who did write a book who was, letting people know, hey, my book is out.
In public session.
But on the flip side, I was very happy because that was a Christmas present for my mother.
Good.
So it does serve purpose. Like, I would be saddened if I couldn't have known about it.
Yeah, and I was going to say, and Susan, and Michael, that's an interesting one. In some ways, that's more informational, because this thing I've been working on is finally done.
Well, maybe it has more a question of using to induce someone to do something. It's not about sharing information. It's about using your position to induce commercial transactions.
And that line was crossed. And I just say, so that's just throwing that out there. It's like, go buy it. You
right. What are you going to do? What are you going to do?
But that's where we come up with things, right? And that's what I was saying, in our own community of things that are of interest that we do want to know about, but not a generic, like,
right.
So, for example, we're going to probably come up with, in the next couple of years, like, save such and such business that's iconic to the village or to a particular neighborhood. And that's a very important thing.
Yeah, but that's not meant to be covered by this. And if it does, and if you read it that way, then the language does need to change. Right. That's not, because being an advocate for somebody else, it's not this. It's like the conflict of interest rules, in the sense of what it means to have a financial interest. The fact that you know that if you're advocating for something and that business will benefit because you're letting people know about it, is not the same thing as, oh, I'm voting for this and I happen to have an interest in it.
Yeah, I mean, I just think about that because it's a very, as we go forward and we look around our own community, this is going to could potentially be an issue as we uncomfortably watch some of the iconic locations that define our community around the world, may close, right. and they're whatever they may be. And I think of like Stonewall, when Stonewall was raising money and GoFundMe. I don't think that it came up for us, but that could be something,
right. No, I don't think that's something that anybody would want to, inhibit discussion of. It's like, yeah, it's maybe one thing if a board member had an ownership interest, they would be expected. It's like, I can't vote on anything connected to that. I have to let you know I have an interest in it. But that doesn't mean, but just the way, for example, if a board member has an interest, they would be conflicted out of voting on something, doesn't mean they can't participate in the discussion. It means they have to tell the board and that they have to recuse. So it's like, there is that, there is room there for advocacy, even when there's a conflict of interest.
Yeah, maybe the exception is you put in there that somebody with prior, clearance with whoever, whether it's the chair or the executive committee, that they could, because that would enable the situation of somebody writing their own book. But they could. I mean, I just throw that out there because it's.
Yeah, I think the bigger thing was more like, something. It's not even about a person making money, but like getting somebody to say, I'm on the board. If you do something for me, I can get a reso passed in your favor.
Well, that's I just think Michael's question hit right to the point of this. About just what is this, and so right. That's a real.
Well, this is a tough one. It's two sentences are a simplistic response to this. It's more complex than that. I know that.
If that person in question said, well, I'm on this, and a principal of a school was trying to influence her vote and went out and bought 1,000 copies of the book. You know, I just, you know, who knows? People do the craziest things, but if we're going to have a rule, we should.
Right.
I think Matt has something to.
Matt.
Susan, I have actually, because I really want this to go for 2 hours. I was going to switch topics for 1 second, but I think based on some looks, I might die. I don't have to.
Well, I'll tell you what. We happy few.
We banned it. We happy.
What's your next topic? We'll see how much we can take.
So just for fun, just for levity, no. I have an annoying thing. I don't love the idea of saying why people should vote in terms of they should vote in the community's best interest, because I can imagine scenarios that are in the community's best interest, but that are immoral.
Okay.
If it's in our community's best interest, but at the expense of CB1 or CB. What are you looking at, Carter? You're muted.
Oh, don't let.
That's right. I'm saying, where is it in the paper? Which part? Are you just saying active
going back to the first paragraph of
the first, the intro.
Okay, got it.
I don't know. I also, I mean, this goes back to, I was told somebody attempted to tell me why I should or should not vote on a landmarks vote, and I understand that the board as an entity has certain rules that we but like it's just physically impossible to tell anyone how they why they should vote.
Susan, question: when you were writing this, did this come from the sentiment that an individual cannot represent the interests of a group to which they belong? And I just ask because that is in the bylaws.
It comes from the sentiment that a person should think beyond their own narrow, in the sense of looking at whether it's the bigger picture or taking, trying to consider multiple perspectives as part of one's.
I was going to say the other aspect, so Matt, I'll give you an example. Many years ago, the executive director of the NoHo bid was a member of Community Board 2, Harriet Fields. Now, as Harriet Fields' membership on the board, she is not representing the NoHo bid's interests on the board. She is acting in her capacity as an individual. And so then when you take that idea that she's acting as an individual and should not be representing the interests of the NoHo bid, and then you tie this into here, I don't disagree with you, but there's something in here that maybe is capturing a little bit of that sentiment as well. Because it's not,
I'm not against, and let me make clear, I'm not against the idea that we should be voting for the greater, that we should be, that our self-interest shouldn't determine our vote. That, that's not my qualm. But just for discussion, just whether there could be, I don't want to say either broader or more precise. I'm not sure which one, but language. One of the two.
Well, it's also, it doesn't.
Wow, that's a great choice.
It really doesn't identify what community is either. So community.
It is. Well, remember, you're talking about these are principles. This is an aspirational statement. It is vague, which is why when you then have more defined, policies that, sort of feed off of this. This one's a tough one, actually. Because these are, frankly, this is not an original phrase. I mean, this is the type of thing you see a lot. You know, that
if you see it a lot in community board bylaws, that means we definitely shouldn't have it in ours. It was a joke. It was a joke.
You're right. I live to be different.
You know, in many respects, right, we're appointed as members of the community boards as stewards of the community board, right?
That's, I think, where that comes from. It's a sense of stewardship.
It's a patronage position, but you're still appointed on the basis that you're acting as a steward. And so that's something, it's an interesting.
100%. I totally with no. My thing was that we would, you know, there is. I often feel why are people coming to CB2? This is our community, and I really don't want that embodied in our bylaws.
I'll give you an example of where this comes into play, right? Where somebody could say exactly what you're bringing up, Matt. Is we had a landmarks application before us of I don't know what the address is. So it's a really beautiful townhouse that was being developed, and they wanted to put solar panels on the roof. And the materials that were the solar panels were currently made up of was really shiny and bright and whatever. There may be other materials that have been made or other ones that were more expensive. But when you say the community's best interest, you know, you can start having a dialogue over what community are you talking about. And if you talk about the global community and having, you know, other energy sources, that's in that interest, but it's not in the landmarks interest. So there are places where that can come up, and you're right. I mean, that's,
you know, what made me think of it was the discussion a while ago on open streets.
in what aspect? I'm just curious.
Patricia looks confused too.
You can't leave a screen like that.
Well, it's good for some and not so good for others, actually.
Yeah. So if you or like outdoor dining, if you have outdoor dining, there are going to be people crowding around my door. You know, I'm 75. I don't want people outside the door. You know, yada.
Or open.
And it's a legitimate concern. You know what I mean? It's that's a hard one.
We also had one board member vote against one of the open streets because that board member lives adjacent to that open street. So there's the issue that Matt is raising. Open streets is good for the community, but for this one board member who was afraid there would be so much noise and so much confusion on the street, he openly said, "I'm voting against."
Right. And maybe they're not voting against it because of them, but they say, you know, our community has people who live on that street who have accessibility issues and would find that the presence of this, you know, use of the streets could inhibit them, which would be totally legitimate. I mean, if you're talking about balance, you're right, balancing of issues, and this is, you know, broad language, yet it's supposed to be applied to very specific situations.
I could also see a scenario where the best interest of the community is not where individual rights would trump that. I'm about to be killed by some of our co-members, so I'm going to quit.
You know, I was going to say it's a really good point, but I think that the issue lies in, and it's not something we would ever want to define, is what people's definition of community is.
Yes.
And so that's not something we would ever want to define, because I think we're a community of communities, right? I mean, and as a result, you know, you could have conflicting votes because people may feel they're representing different communities, and that's okay also. You know,
that's why we have 50 people on
if
the board.
If we were called Zone 2 Manhattan, I would be totally fine with the word community. But because this is really the underlying issue, because community is in our name, it automatically, in my mind, assumes the boundaries of our of community district 2. And I don't know whether just a synonym for community would be acceptable to the group, but
Such as?
I don't have one yet, and I'm not next to a thesaurus, and that's my
and that's maybe the best way to look at this, because of especially where this phrase is sitting, is that if it sort of spurs people to think about things from multiple perspectives, to sort of challenge themselves and saying, what's an issue here? How do you look at it? That may be the best that we can hope for. It's sort of, again, maybe the goal is simply to say, we'd like you to be selfless in how you exercise your authority when you vote. It's not about the specific determination someone comes to. It's about thinking about it as it's bigger than me, just one way. But that's this is something you've really got to sit and think about. It's a lot, and I'm getting tired. So
I just looked up synonyms, and it's in the communal and public were two of them, and when you interchange either of those, I think they change the sentiment so far away.
You mean talk about the public's best interest, but who is the public in the sense of I don't know that you're getting any more clarity by changing it. Maybe it's better to strike the phrase. You simply vote on issues in accordance with your best understanding and your beliefs, or your best understanding,
I kind of like the way it is.
Yeah, I'm kind of resistant to touching it. So Matt, if you're going to want something, you're going to have to be a little more persuasive.
How about can we discuss it next time?
Absolutely. This is not set in stone. This is not set in stone.
In that case, have a wonderful night.
And maybe Matt can come up with some language.
Yeah, exactly.
Or maybe
I'm happy to.
Or maybe offline before online.
Or whatever. No, this is not set in stone. I mean, this is a work in progress, and which is why, but you've got, these are the kind of things that you have to sort of live with, and then it sort of comes to you, especially when you're talking about something that is, it's sort of trying to embody our core values. It's like, so no rush, but I'll expect it by, close of business Friday.
Not a problem.
Yeah.
You forget I'm a banker. There's like close of business Fridays in 2 months. I mean,
Susan, when is the next meeting? I forgot what you said.
On the calendar right now, we have it on the 19th. It's a Monday.
Right.
6:30?
6:30.
Monday, the 19th at 6:30. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, there's no other open days between now and then. Aw, shucks.
What a shame.
I will, certainly anybody who's got ideas or things that they like, based on today's discussion or any other discussions, circulate. We don't have to, we can certainly circulate, text and ideas offline. Okay?
Sounds good to me.
Everybody happy? As
yes,
happy
thank you.
As happy as you can be after 2 hours of this.
Given last night, today was so much better.
Oh my God, do you realize we actually stop and listen to one another? Is like, are we becoming like, like relics or something that we like actually tried to do this?
We are the model for our future civilization.
Yeah.
Right, right. Okay, guys, thank you so much. Thank you, and I will be talking to you.
All right, good night.
Have a great night.
Good night, guys. Good night. Bye-bye. Yeah, and we're